Pops, you're a little old for this, ain't you?
Guys, welcome to a classic film review of 1975's Hard Times, starring Charles Bronson and Jill Ireland. Now, this is one of cinema's great debut movies as Walter Hill arrives on the scene, providing Charles Bronson with one of his great roles as Chaney, the silent stranger whose fists do the talking, and James Coburn as Speed, his unreliable manager in the world of bare-knuckle fighting, all set in Depression-era New Orleans. Now, also going by the name The Streetfighter, the film is a precursor to that same named video game franchise, as well as films such as Van Damme's AWOL and even elements of Fight Club. There's no overtly theatrical fisticuffs here though, just sweaty men going toe-to-toe, fist to fist, with a 53-year-old Bronson in the shape of his life. Let's take a look. Now, when you have Charles Bronson in your movie, you have to play to his strengths. Think of his standout roles, Paul Kersey in Death Wish, Harmonica in Once Upon a Time in the West, and this. Roles where a page of dialogue can be replaced with just a stare or a blunt one-word answer. Such is his role here as Chaney in Walter Hill's first feature film.
We used my bankroll to begin with, my money, my contacts. You were a bum when I met you, and you're nothing without me. Yeah, I figure you owe me. Dumb. You say you know to me?
Now, in true Western style, his character arrives in New Orleans in a car of a freight train, looking for work, and this being the Great Depression, he's unlikely to find anything above board, and soon he stumbles upon a bare-knuckle boxing match, and not long after meets Speed, played by an, as usual, brilliant James Coburn, and makes him an offer to be his new fighter.
Look, friend, every town you got a bar, every bar's got somebody in it thinks he's tough as a nickel steak. But they all come to Speed for the do-re-mi. He's a bum. I'm the one that loses.
Now, you could argue that what follows is pretty formulaic. Coburn's character is a great fight promoter, but a terrible gambler, a guy who is constantly in debt to the local crime bosses, but he sees his meal ticket in Bronson's talented brawler, and he soon sets his sights on beating the unbeatable prize fighter owned by a local kingpin. Now, in order to do this, he has to get his hands on a huge stake, and suffice to say, it doesn't all go to plan.
That's $950.
I said 1,000.
That's 50 for the loan, and 50 for every day until it comes back.
Now, my favourite thing about Hard Times is the double act here of Bronson and Coburn. Of course, they'd starred together previously in ensemble projects like The Magnificent Seven and The Great Escape, but here they're a kind of buddy cop duo.
60-40 in my favor on scratch, side bets down the middle.
Well, I'm telling you the going rate. What's normal? Ask anybody.
We'll do things different.
Why should we?
One of them, the brooding silent type who only speaks when necessary and wants just enough money to pay his way and leave town. And contrast this with the other, who's an outspoken loudmouth who gets himself in more trouble than he can handle. I love both actors, and they're suitably rough and grizzled here to the point you can believe that they exist in the rough climate of the 1930s, especially Bronson, who looks exactly like someone who sleeps rough in train cars. Now, cinematographer Philip Lathrop does conjure a convincing Depression-era New Orleans to surround the cast with. Now, the only thing that threatens to spoil proceeding is Jill Ireland, who, bless her, has absolutely no business being here. And yeah, I know by this point Bronson was making sure his wife got a role in pretty much everything he did, but what we have here is an entirely superfluous romantic subplot. Now, if there was any kind of romance between her and Brosnan, it got chopped out in the edit by Walter Hill, who famously disliked Ireland's performance. Because she flits in and out of the plot and then disappears, there's not a speck of chemistry or even an interesting conversation really to be had between the pair. She looks lovely, of course, and even mostly gets away with the accent. It's a shame, as there maybe could have been an interesting side plot here with two lost and lonely souls struggling in their own ways. But admittedly, that would detract from the main draw of this movie, and that's Charles Bronson, a year after his Death Wish role, swapping his Colt 32 for his fists here and punching his way to payday. The fight scenes in Hard Times are more authentic than your average or modern day shaky cam punch up. They're not over the top here and not over choreographed. There's no slow motion, there's no elaborate finishing moves, just men taking a battering one by one until Bronson must face the final boss in a warehouse showdown. But yeah, I didn't say it was Shakespeare. Now, like I mentioned, Bronson was about 53 years old at the time of release and was at the height of his stardom, probably with film projects coming thick and fast, with him often appearing in 3 films a year. 1975 seeing him appear in this film, Breakout and Breakout Pass. It would be another 7 years until he started to get pulled into the orbit of the Death Wish sequels and some schlocky B movies. Now, James Coburn, another one of my favourite actors, and the kind of actors that just don't really exist anymore, was one of the most charismatic guys in Hollywood for decades, working from 1957 right up until his death in 2002. Now, like I said, the whole production here feels authentic, shot on location with some excellent costumes and period details. The whole thing has an almost sepia-tinted, washed-out look. Although if you are familiar with the Capcom Streetfighter video games, you may notice some similarities between the locations here and the levels in that game, and that's because the designers literally lifted them straight from this movie. Do you know what? I almost forgot to mention Strother Martin's in this movie as well, as a drug-addicted doctor / cutman brought in to patch Bronson up during fights, not that he really needs it. Martin, of course, was a Western staple for decades, but possibly most well known for his role as the captain from Cool Hand Luke. Here he gives another eccentric performance, a good counterpoint to the seriousness of some of Coburn's and Bronson's exchanges.
While in my 3rd year of studies, a small black cloud appeared on campus. I left under it.
What he's trying to say is that he's a dyed-in-wool hophead.
I have a weakness for opium.
It's a habit that's hard to quit.
Now, this being Walter Hill's first film, which is amazing really, is it's a pretty polished affair. He keeps things simple and fashions almost a Western here. The silent hero arriving in town and cleaning the place up. Inadvertently here, but nonetheless. Bronson's Chaney has that lone samurai ethos. He doesn't want for much, just a bed and food as he passes through, and even doesn't want to get involved in a later mess that Coburn's character gets himself caught up in, although his morals do eventually get the better of him. It's interesting that Hill would follow this up with another movie with an almost silent hero, with 1978's The Driver with Ryan O'Neal. Hill, of course, would go on to make The Warriors, Southern Comfort, 48 Hours, Red Heat, amongst many others. But here in his first foray into filmmaking, Hill knew he just had to point the camera in the direction of James Coburn and Charles Bronson and let the script and their screen presence do all the work. And it does. Sometimes exposition and deep and meaningful backstories and trauma-soaked character motivation can just get in the way of a strong silent hero and a scrap for survival. As the poster says here, New Orleans, 1933. In those days, words didn't buy much. Go check it out.
I don't think you want to use it.
That's one way. You want to see another?